Mitosis is a process by which a cell divides. A sequence of 4 phases by which it must divide. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Hey, this is Mr. Peterson. This screencast, beginning rather ominously with a little tune about mitosis. So this screencast is about cell division. Here's a couple of cells in the middle of division. They're just kind of splitting apart. They're just about to engage in a process called cytokinesis, where 2 cells will split. 1 cell will split into 2, I should say. So here's a little movie of cells. Ooh, what are those things in the middle there? Yeah, those are chromosomes. So big in this story is going to be the business of chromosomes and what happens to them in cell division. So why do cells divide? Well, yeah, that's a fetus. You remember being a fetus? Those are good days, right? We started out as 1 cell, and pretty soon we divide and divide and divide and divide, and pretty soon 40 weeks later, thereabouts, out comes bouncing baby you. So growth. Here's a skink. 5-line skink. We have those in Minnesota. Not supposed to have them as far north as where I live right now, but we do. And what's with the skink? That's right, it's got the tail. It can replace itself. So that's kind of crazy. Regeneration. Reproduction. Here's a hydra. These are goofy little organisms that live in aquatic environments, and they reproduce one another by budding off of one another. Hydra are pretty cool. And then repair, right? You boogered your nose doing something, and a little bit of repair, right? So we replace that scab is the cells rebuilding and reconstructing that guy's nose. It's not me. I don't know who it is. It's some other guy. Anyway, so cells have what we call a cycle. So it's a cycle that happens over and over and over again. It's a cycle that happens over and over and over again. It's a cycle that happens, yeah, okay, you get it. And it's divided into different stages. So think about a cell cycle kind of like a clock. So like the time of day, what happens during different times. So the first part of the cell cycle, which happens right after a cell division. So a cell divides, it jumps into G1, which stands for gap. What's the gap? The gap between cell division. So here's where most cells spend their time. Okay, and it's a part of the cell cycle we call interphase. So it's in between the phases of reproduction. So cells grow, carry out their normal functions. The next phase, the cells get some kind of message, and immediately the DNA, the genetic material necessary for the next couple of cells, is going to be synthesized. It's going to make copies of itself. So we call it the S phase for synthesis, DNA synthesis. In G2, it's kind of like the bags are getting packed. So the second gap phase is we have some additional growth. We're going to swell the cytoplasm up in preparation for the next cell division. Then finally, we jump into mitosis, which is the business of cell division. And mitosis is divided into 2 parts. We have, the M phase. Mitosis is divided into the nuclear division, which is really mitosis. And then we have cytokinesis, which is the splitting of the cell. So mitosis has 4 phases. And cytokinesis is that one last part of cell division that actually creates 2 separate new entities, 2 separate new daughter cells, we'll call them. And mitosis is only going to happen if, supposedly, now this is regular, right? So regular cell division, only if the cell is undamaged and the DNA is ready to rock and roll. Sometimes cells get stuck in cell division. And we've studied that now with cancer. That's the business of the cell cycle clock getting stuck in the on position, pedal to the metal, and just going crazy with cell division. That creates lots and lots of abnormal cells, which can create a tumor or just an imbalance in cells in an organism. Let's start with a chromosome. Chromosomes, we gotta really understand what a chromosome is. So a chromosome is made of DNA, right? So DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, it's the stuff of genes. And the DNA is wrapped around histones. So they're wrapped around things that kind of look like yo-yos. And then those are coiled and coiled and coiled and coiled until we finally get that X-shaped structure that looks like that one on the right-hand side of your screen. I think it's on the right-hand side of your screen. Maybe it's on the left side, wherever. I've highlighted it. Now, it has two sister chromatids. So one chromosome has two sister chromatids. Those sister chromatids are replicated. They're identical to one another. So in S of the cell cycle, that DNA, that chromosome, has replicated itself in preparation for cell division. So one chromosome, two sister chromatids. Here's just another quick look at what a chromosome looks like. So one half of a duplicated chromosome, we call it chromatid. So here's a condensed duplicated chromosome. So the DNA, it's kind of like when you're going on vacation, you pack all your stuff in a bag. So that's what happens with DNA. Normally the DNA is spread out all over the cell, and when the cell gets ready to divide, it packages them up into these chromosomes. And typically, you've seen pictures of chromosomes. You've seen drawings of chromosomes. So this is a duplicated chromosome. So this chromosome is divided into two chromatids, and we call those sister chromatids. So we got daughter cells, and we got sister chromatids. And those sister chromatids are held together at a protein junction called the centromere. Oof, I hope you're taking notes on this. Chromosomes divided, actually replicated, not divided, replicated in S, make two sister chromatids, and the chromatids are held together at the centromere, at least temporarily. And at the end of the chromosome are structures called telomeres. Now, there's some pretty good research that says telomeres have a lot to do with aging, and as cells divide, their telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter until the cell may die, or maybe even influence the age of the organism, the way an organism ages. So my telomeres are probably shorter than yours because my cells have been dividing for maybe about 1,000 years or something. Anyway, so telomeres protect the ends of the chromosomes, and scientists are studying those. We're really looking into what that happens. All right, so mitosis and cytokinesis produce two genetically identical daughter cells. So when cells in my skin are dividing, when one cell divides into two, those cells here are genetically identical. So how does that happen? So now we're going to take a look at that and look at some of the phases of a dividing cell. So interphase, if you remember back in that cell cycle, interphase is broken up into G1, the gap 1, the S, and the G2, and that's called interphase. It's in between cell divisions. And then the DNA gets ready to go, and we wind up with a cell that kind of looks like this. So I'm going to show you some pictures as well as some illustrations. So within the nucleus, we have the DNA that's just doing what it's doing. And then we also have these structures called centrioles that are going to produce kind of the railroad tracks that are going to drive the chromosomes around in cell division. So mitosis is broken up into 4 phases. And the first one is called prophase. Okay, so what happens in prophase? Write this down. Here we go. Chromosomes condense. So in other words, the DNA that's all spread out and being used by the cell condenses into these structures that look like the chromosomes you have here. Now, how many chromosomes are there in the cell? Count them. I can't hear you. There's 4. Yeah, there's four chromosomes, and they're going to show up in prophase. So prophase, next step is metaphase. And metaphase, what happens is that the chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. So they've been pushed and pulled by those lines. Really cool motors is what they are. There's some, it's really, I'll show you some animation of that at some point in time. And actually some live footage, because you can watch these guys on those spindle fibers doing what they do. So the metaphase cell has the chromosomes lined up in the center, on the equatorial plane, as it were. In the middle, there's that illustration, but then over on the left side of your screen, you'll see the spindle fibers have been stained green by a fluorescent dye, and then the chromosomes are stained, of course, I don't know because I'm colorblind. It's either blue or purple, I can't tell. And so that's an actual cell that's going through division. So we've got prophase, we've got metaphase, now we've got anaphase. Now the sister chromatids are going to separate, and they're going to get pulled by the spindle fibers, by these little walking motor things, to the poles, to the opposite sides of the cell. So you can see the red chromosomes getting pulled in the photograph, as well as the 4 chromosomes that are getting separated in the illustration. So that's anaphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase. And the last thing is telophase. And we start to form 2 nuclei, and the cell starts to split apart. Notice the chromosomes are different than in the beginning. They're not replicated anymore, but there are still 4 chromosomes in each of these cells. So remember, the goal of mitosis is to produce 2 genetically identical cells. And so that's kind of what's happened. Now, cytokinesis is the splitting of the cells. And it's a little bit different in plant and animal cells. So we'll start with an animal cell. Here's an animal cell that has 2 nuclei and some proteins called actin filaments are going to pinch this cell off. It's going to pinch it off and just create a crease between these 2 cells until eventually we're going to have 2 brand spanking new cells. So that's what the cells in the human body do. That's what the cells in any animal do. So they actually have this thing called a cleavage furrow, where the actin fibers kind of, it's like a purse string, if you will. Now, in plant cells, we form a cell plate. So here's a giant plant cell that's undergone cell division. And remember, plant cells have cell walls. And so it's going to form a cell plate that's eventually going to form a new cell wall made of cellulose. So a little bit different for plant and animal cells. Differences there. Otherwise, not much different. They're doing, holy cow, look at this. This is a picture of an onion root tip. And look at all these different cells, and there are different parts. Can you find prophase? Can you find an anaphase cell or metaphase? You should be able to do that, and that's one of the things you're going to be working towards. So prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So mitosis and cytokinesis. So here's a look at cells in interphase. This is live footage of cells. It's sped up a little bit, but you're going to watch these cells go through cell division. Ooh, prophase, look at that. You can see the chromosomes starting to show up. The nuclear membrane goes away. It's kind of like I'm doing play-by-play. As the chromosomes condense, now we're just about into metaphase, Jim. That's right. They're lining up in the middle of the cell. There we've got, lined up nicely on the metaphase plate. The centromeres get pushed and pulled to the center of the cell. Anaphase, there they go. Look at those chromatids. They've been separated now, and now we have telophase cell. Way to go, Jim. Way to, look at that. And we've got 2 new cells. This is a plant cell, so eventually that line is going to form 2 brand spanking new cells. And that's cytokinesis. So mitosis and cytokinesis going on in those cells. Okay, just a quick review. Think about the chromosome anatomy. That's going to be really important. Chromosomes, chromatids, centromeres, sister chromatids, all that stuff. Interphase and G1 and S and G2 and what happens in those. So what happens in those, that'll be an important thing to know in the cell cycle. And then mitosis and cytokinesis, what happens in prophase, what happens to the chromosomes, what happens in metaphase, what happens to the chromosomes, what happens in anaphase, think about the chromosomes there if you have to go back and look at it. And then telophase, and we're going to make eventually 2 nuclei, and then eventually pinch those off into brand spanking new cells. So mitosis and cytokinesis, the business of cell division, making 2 genetically identical cells. So I hope that helps.